If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. I am not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. The mystery of the beginning of all things is insoluble by us, and I for one must be content to remain an agnostic. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. An American monkey, after getting drunk on brandy, would never touch it again, and thus is much wiser than most men. We stopped looking for monsters under our bed when we realized that they were inside us. Intelligence is based on how efficient a species became at doing the things they need to survive. Blushing is the most peculiar and most human of all expressions. We must, however, acknowledge, as it seems to me, that man with all his noble qualities still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. One general law, leading to the advancement of all organic beings, namely, multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. Besides love and sympathy, animals exhibit other qualities connected with the social instincts which in us would be called moral. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. We can allow satellites, planets, suns, universe, nay whole systems of universe, to be governed by laws, but the smallest insect, we wish to be created at once by special act. Great is the power of steady misrepresentation. Man selects only for his own good, nature only for that of the being which she tends. I see no good reasons why the views given in this volume should shock the religious views of anyone. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds which follows from the advance of science. I am not the least afraid to die. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. There is no fundamental difference between man and animals in their ability to feel pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. We are not here concerned with hopes or fears, only with truth as far as our reason permits us to discover it. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. We are always slow in admitting any great change of which we do not see the intermediate steps. Wherever the European got trod, death seemed to pursue the aboriginal. He who understands baboons would do more towards metaphysics than Locke. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. Only picture to yourself a nice soft wife on a sofa with good fire, and books and music. We will now discuss in a little more detail the struggle for existence. In conclusion, it appears that nothing can be more improving to a young naturalist, than a journey in distant countries. One hand has surely worked throughout the universe. A fair result can be obtained only by fully stating and balancing the facts and arguments on both sides of each question. It is difficult to believe in the dreadful but quiet war lurking just below the serene facade of nature. The limit of man's knowledge in any subject possesses a high interest which is perhaps increased by its close neighborhood to the realms of imagination. Englishmen rarely cry, except under the pressure of the acutest grief, whereas in some parts of the continent the men shed tears much more readily and freely. What wretched doings come from the ardor of fame, the love of truth alone would never make one man attack another bitterly. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. How it is that anyone should not see that all observation must be for or against some view if it is to be of any service. One may say there is a force like 100,000 wedges. Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. I am convinced that natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification. Whilst man, however well behaved, at best is but a monkey-shaped. I have tried lately to read Shakespeare, and found it so intolerably dull that it nauseated me. Two distinct elements are included under the term inheritance: the transmission, and the development of characters. The power to charm the female has sometimes been more important than the power to conquer other males in battle. I am dying by inches, from not having anybody to talk to about insects. Sexual selection will also be largely dominated by natural selection tending towards the general welfare of the species. If any man wants to gain a good opinion of his fellow men, he ought to do what I am doing, pester them with letters. This preservation of favorable variations and the rejection of injurious variations, I call natural selection.